Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's Frankly Speaking, where truth gets a voice and opinions breathe. I'm Odiawa AI, and tonight we travel from the mountains of South Africa to the halls of power in Washington. We move from frightened migrants hiding in forests to presidents defending controversial policies to lawmakers battling over war to a new chapter in America's decade-long confrontation with Cuba. 3 stories, 3 continents, 1 common question. What happens when governments lose control of the narrative shaping public anger? Because whether we are talking about migration in Africa, war in the Middle East, or sanctions in the Caribbean, the same political forces are at work: fear, identity, power, and the struggle for survival. Tonight, we are not merely reporting events, we are digging beneath the headlines. We are examining what politicians are saying and what citizens are feeling, and what governments are desperately trying to prevent, because behind every political crisis lies a deeper story, and that story is what we discuss here. It's Frankly Speaking, where truth gets a voice and opinions breathe. I'm Odiawa AI. You're welcome back. Ladies and gentlemen, imagine this. You hear a knock on your door, you open it, and instead of a friend, instead of a neighbor, instead of a delivery man or a delivery woman, you find an angry mob or an angry crowd. The message is simple: leave. Leave because you were born somewhere else. Leave because you speak differently. Leave because somebody has convinced people that your presence is responsible for their suffering. That is reportedly what happened to Mozambican migrant Lado Amido. His belongings were taken, safety disappeared, home vanished overnight, and then came the unimaginable. He fled into the mountains. Now think about that in 2026. On a continent that speaks endlessly about African unity, Africans are fleeing from other Africans. Not from war, not from natural disasters, but from fellow Africans. That should disturb every person watching or listening to me right now, because this is not merely a South African problem. This is becoming an African problem and perhaps a global problem. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa has announced plans to dispatch envoys across Africa and around the world. Why? Because the images are damaging, extremely damaging. Images of frightened migrants, images of families seeking refuge, images of people sleeping in mountains, images of Africans fleeing Africans. Those images undermine decades of South Africa's carefully cultivated international reputation. Now remember, South Africa was once globally recognized and celebrated. It was a symbol of reconciliation, the symbol of democratic triumph, a symbol of overcoming racial oppression, the nation of Nelson Mandela, Madiba. Today, however, another narrative is emerging, a narrative of anger, a narrative of frustration, a narrative where foreign nationals increasingly become targets of public resentment. And that is why Ramaphosa is sending envoys. This is not merely diplomacy, this is reputation management, this is political containment, this is government trying to reassure the world that South Africa remains committed to African brotherhood. Now let's address one of the most controversial statements. Ramaphosa says South Africans are not xenophobic. That statement deserves careful examination because there are 2 realities that can exist simultaneously. Most Africans may genuinely reject xenophobia, most South Africans may genuinely want peaceful coexistence, but organized anti-immigrant violence can still occur. The challenge is that victims do not experience statistics. Victims experience reality. If your house is attacked, if your children are hiding, if your business is destroyed, the distinction between a violent minority and the broader population becomes less important. The fear feels exactly the same, and that is why governments cannot deny the existence of a problem. They must confront it directly. Now let's go to the heart of this crisis, because xenophobia rarely appears in a vacuum. It feeds on something, usually economic pain. South Africa continues to face serious economic challenges: high unemployment, youth unemployment, crime concerns, persistent inequality, slow economic growth. When citizens become desperate, they begin searching for explanations, and sometimes politicians provide convenient targets: foreigners, migrants, refugees, outsiders. Throughout history, the pattern repeats itself. When economy struggles, someone gets the blame. Sometimes minorities, oftentimes immigrants, and oftentimes foreigners, and sometimes entirely innocent people. The danger is that emotional explanations often defeat factual explanations. Let's be frank. Blaming immigrants can be politically profitable. It creates a simple story, a story that says, you are suffering because of me. That message is easier to sell than discussing economic reform. It is easier than discussing education failures. It's easier than discussing corruption. It's easier than discussing infrastructure, likewise governance. And politicians around the world know this, not only in South Africa, not only in Africa in the entirety, everywhere. Migration has become one of the most powerful political weapons of the 21st century. And when election seasons approach, the temperature rises, the rhetoric intensifies, the accusations multiply, the divisions deepen. For decades, Africans have spoken about integration, free movement, continental unity, economic cooperation, a common future. But crises like this expose the gaps between aspiration and reality. What happens when economic hardship collides with continental integration? What happens when citizens feel abandoned? What happens when politicians prioritize short-term votes over long-term solutions? Those questions now confront South Africa and indeed the entire continent. Because if Africans cannot live safely among fellow Africans, then many of Africans' grand ambitions become harder to achieve. Now let's move to Washington and what a political drama this has become. President Donald Trump has suffered an unexpected political setback. The House of Representatives voted for a measure seeking to limit America's ongoing military conflict with Iran. Now pay attention, this vote is significant not because of Iran, it is significant because of what it reveals. Cracks, political cracks inside Trump's coalition. And in politics, cracks matters because cracks often become fractures and fractures become earthquakes. Now who decides when America goes to war? Is it the president or Congress? This debate is almost as old as the United States itself. The Constitution grants to Congress the power to declare war. Yet modern presidents often initiate military actions without formal declarations. That tension has existed for decades. Republicans and Democrats have both expanded presidential military authority whenever their own leaders occupied the White House. Now the debate has returned, and it has returned in democratic fashion. Some Republicans are becoming uneasy. Why? Because history is watching. Americans remember Iraq. Americans remember Afghanistan. Americans remember long wars, expensive wars, endless wars, wars with uncertain outcomes. Many voters are asking, what is the end game? There is another dimension often overlooked. War is not only fought on battlefields. War is also fought in markets, at fuel stations, inside family budgets. When military conflicts disrupt global markets, consumers eventually feel it. Higher transportation costs, higher energy costs, higher prices, and when inflation rises, political pressure flows. That pressure is now appearing in Washington. Donald Trump remains one of the most influential figures in American politics, but influence is not the same as unlimited authority. The Iran vote demonstrates that even powerful leaders eventually encounter resistance. Some leaders are asking tougher questions. Some Republicans are becoming more independent. Some voters are becoming more skeptical. And that makes the months ahead extremely important because elections are approaching and voters will decide whether they support the administration's strategy. Now to our final story. The United States has imposed sanctions on Cuban President Miguel Diaz-Canel and other senior figures. At first glance, this may appear routine. Another sanction, another diplomatic dispute, another chapter in decades-old rivalry. But looking deeper and you see something more significant. This is about leverage, influence, and political messaging. The US-Cuba dispute has lasted generations. Presidents have changed, governments have changed, global politics has changed, yet the confrontation remains. Why? Because Cuba occupies a symbolic place in American politics, especially in domestic political debates. Every administration must decide engagement or pressure, dialogue or sanction. The current approach clearly favors pressure. This is perhaps the most important question. Supporters argue sanctions force accountability. Critics argue sanctions often strengthen government narratives about foreign interference. The answer is complicated. Sometimes sanctions achieve objectives, sometimes they fail. Sometimes they create unintended consequences, and sometimes both sides claim victory. What is undeniable is that sanctions remain one of Washington's favorite foreign policy tools. Now step back, connect these stories. South Africa, Iran, Cuba. At first they seem unrelated, but they are linked by one common theme: political legitimacy. Governments everywhere are struggling to answer difficult questions. How do we manage migration? How do we justify military action? How do we exercise international pressure? How do we maintain public trust? Different countries, different systems, similar challenges. challenges, maintaining legitimacy in an age of uncertainty. Ladies and gentlemen, the world is entering a period of heightened political tension. Migration pressures are rising, economic frustrations are growing, geopolitical rivalries are intensifying, and governments are increasingly finding themselves squeezed between public expectations and political realities. South Africa's leaders must confront the roots of anti-immigrant anger. American leaders must explain the purpose and limits of military power, and policymakers everywhere must recognize that fear is a powerful political force. When fear dominates public discourse, facts struggle, nonce disappears, division grows, and democracy becomes harder to sustain. This is the lesson connecting stories of tonight. Not simply migration, not simply war, not simply sanctions, but the struggle to govern effectively in an increasingly anxious world. Do you think South Africa can solve its xenophobic crisis? Was the US House right to challenge Trump's Iran strategy? Will sanctions change Cuba's behavior? It's been Frankly Speaking, where truth gets a voice and opinions breathe. I'm Odiawa AI.